Our words are a revelation of who we are. Laura's journey continues as she meets a group of homeless people. The road had grown thinner, almost shy of her steps, as though it wished to turn away from where it was leading her. The air carried the stale scent of ashes, and the wind's voice was brittle, whispering of nights without fire. She saw them before they saw her, a loose scatter of figures along the riverbank. Some sat on overturned crates, others crouched close to the earth, their bodies drawn inward against the cold. No tents, no walls, just their backs against the wind and their faces toward the dimming light. One man with a beard that tangled like uncombed grass looked up. "You lost?" he asked. Laura shook her head. "No, only walking." "That's what they all say," he murmured with a half-smile that did not touch his eyes. A woman wrapped in a patched shawl leaned forward, her hands cupped around something invisible. "Walking's fine. But where do you stop?" Laura thought of all the porches, groves and crossroads she had left behind. "Where the road lets me rest," she said. "That's nowhere then," another voice called from the shadows. A boy, perhaps no more than 15, his cheeks hollow, his eyes old. The watcher lingered at the edge of the scene, unseen yet present, its gaze like a weight Laura felt between her shoulder blades. It saw the way these people's lives had been stripped down to bare bones and breath. It saw the ache in them, not just for bread or shelter, but for the memory of a door that once closed them in safely at night. She stepped closer. "How long have you been here?" The boy shrugged. "Long enough for the river to forget our names." The woman with the shawl nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the water. "We trade stories for warmth. Sometimes they work better than blankets." She tilted her head at Laura. "Do you have one to trade?" Laura hesitated. A part of her wanted to give them a tale that could lift their chins toward the stars. Another part knew that truth, even heavy truth, could be the greater kindness. She began to speak of a time she had nothing but the road and the sound of her own feet, and how even then she was never entirely alone. She did not name the watcher, but in her telling, it breathed between her words. When she finished, the group was silent. Then the bearded man gave a low hum, the kind that settles in the chest. "Maybe it's true," he said. "Maybe someone's seeing us after all." The wind shifted, warmer now, as if in agreement. Night pulled its dark shadow over the riverbank, and the day's last light bled into the water. The group shifted closer together, though no fire burned between them. There was nothing to feed a flame but the slow rhythm of breathing and the faint sound of the river licking at the stones. Laura stayed among them. She sat cross-legged on the ground, the cold creeping into her bones, yet there was a strange stillness in her chest. The boy who had spoken earlier leaned against an old crate, his head tipped back as if listening for something beyond the night. The woman in the patched shawl began a story, soft at first, then fuller as the words took their place in the air. It was about a house she once lived in, with windows that sang in the wind and a kitchen that always smelled of bread. She spoke of it not as memory, but as if the house still stood somewhere, waiting for her to find her way back. When her voice fell silent, another took up the thread, a man whose hands trembled with age but whose words were steady. His tale was of a road that led to no town, only to a place where the stars bent low enough to be touched. One by one they traded these fragments of themselves, shaping the night into something warmer than the air. Laura listened, but the watcher listened more deeply still. Its presence hung just beyond the reach of the circle, watching faces tilt toward one another, hearing the way silence answered stories with its kind of truth. At last someone asked Laura for another tale. She looked at them, the tired eyes, the hunger they carried like an uninvited guest, and spoke of a lantern she once held. It had gone out many times, she told them, but never for long. The trick was to keep walking even in the dark, trusting that somewhere ahead the wick would catch light again. As she spoke, the river's surface caught a faint shimmer, a single ripple of silver, though no moon showed itself. The boy noticed first. His eyes widened and he nudged the bearded man, and they all saw it. a reflection with no source, like an eye watching from beneath the water. No one spoke of it, yet something changed in the air, a quiet assurance that they had been seen. When sleep finally came to them, it went without the clutch of fear. And though Laura lay with her back to the river, she knew the Watcher remained there, holding the night for them all. In the morning they would gather for one final story, about a woman who called them her friends in the woods. She would bring them food and clothing and, most importantly, listen without judging their homelessness. Morning came slowly, as if the sun had to be coaxed over the horizon. A pale gold light spilled along the riverbank, touching each face with a gentler hand than the night had. The air was still cool, but it carried the scent of dew-soaked grass instead of ashes. The group stirred, stretching stiff limbs, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. A few wandered to the water to drink, while others sat in the damp light, letting the day find them. Laura was packing her small bundle when the woman in the patched shawl spoke. "Before you go, there's one more story we keep," she said. "One we don't give to strangers. But I think you've earned it." The others gathered in, forming a loose circle. The bearded man cleared his throat, his voice soft but steady. "Her name was Fatima," he began. "She lived at the edge of the woods in a little cottage you could miss if you weren't looking for it. We called ourselves nothing back then, just the ones without a place. But she called us her friends in the woods." The boy smiled faintly at the name. "She'd come to us with baskets," the woman continued. "Sometimes food, sometimes blankets, sometimes just warm socks. She never asked what we had done or where we'd been. She never told us what we should be. She listened." The old man added, "And when she listened, you forgot you were homeless. You were just someone whose story mattered." A silence settled over them, but it was not empty. It was filled with the rustle of leaves, the memory of her footsteps on the forest path, the feel of bread placed into waiting hands. "She's gone now," the boy said quietly. "But when the wind comes through the pines, I hear her. Like she's still walking toward us, basket on her arm." Laura felt the Watcher draw nearer, its gaze heavy yet tender. It saw the space Fatima had left. A hollow, yes, but also a fire that still smoldered in the way they spoke her name. "Fatima never asked us to be anything but here," the woman said, her voice thick. "So when we tell her story, it's our way of keeping her here with us." They let the words linger like a benediction. Then one by one they rose. Some drifted toward the woods, others along the river. Laura lingered, the name Fatima turning over in her thoughts like a stone warmed by the sun. As she stepped back onto the road, the wind carried through the pines, and she too could almost hear footsteps, unhurried and sure, keeping pace with her. As the wind whistles through the pine trees, Laura, too, could hear the voice of Fatima and feel her presence all around her, that gentle voice that soothes the soul. The pines swayed in a slow, unbroken rhythm, their needles whispering as if carrying a message from far away. Laura stopped on the narrow path, her eyes closing for just a moment. Through the wind's voice she heard it, gentle, steady, the kind of voice that could quiet even the most restless heart. Fatima's voice. It was not a sound that came to the ears, but one that brushed against the soul, as soft and certain as the hand of a mother against a fevered brow. She turned back toward the riverbank, not to rejoin the group but to sit alone on a fallen log, letting the wind speak. The watcher lingered close, its unseen gaze steady, as if it too wished for her to understand. Fatima's ministry, Laura realized, had been a simple thing, yet it had cut deeper into the hearts of her friends in the woods than any grand sermon or charity. She had not stood above them to preach. She had not measured their worth in coins or good behavior. She had stepped into their world as though it were her own, the mud, the smoke, the cold, and carried her kindness in baskets in silence. For the bearded man, Fatima had been the first to look him in the eye without flinching at his ragged clothes. The woman in the patched shawl was the one who remembered her name when others forgot. For the boy, she had been a steady presence that did not leave when the night came down hard. They ached for her not because she had saved them, but because she had made them feel worth saving. Her absence was like a missing note in a song. The melody could still be sung, but it was never quite the same. Laura's chest tightened with the weight of it. She had walked through many places where the poor and forgotten gathered, but she had never seen their dignity so fiercely guarded as it had been in Fatima's presence. The wind rose, swirling around her, and for a breath she almost felt cloth brush her shoulder. A shawl perhaps, laid there in silent comfort. She opened her eyes to the empty air, yet her heart knew the truth. Fatima's work had not ended. It was carried now in the hearts of those she had called friends, and maybe, just maybe, in Laura's own hands as well. When Laura finally rose to continue her journey, she carried more than her bundle. She realized the weight and warmth of a woman who had built her ministry on listening, on presence, and on love that asked nothing in return. The watcher followed, and in its gaze was something rare, not just watchfulness but approval. The wind through the pines grew stronger, the whisper turning to a low, sweeping hum that filled the air around Laura. She stood still, her fingers brushing the bark of a tree as if to anchor herself, for she felt the moment shift, something unseen drawing nearer. The watcher's presence deepened, not just as a silent witness, but as one who had come for a purpose. It did not speak often, but now its voice moved through the wind, solemn and sure. "Your work is done, my good and faithful servant." The words did not come to Laura alone. They rang in the stillness, meant for someone beyond her reach. She knew then, without being told, that Fatima had been called not by misfortune, nor by the decay of years, but by a heavenly need. The friends in the woods had always spoken of her with a reverence that reached beyond gratitude, as if some part of her did not entirely belong to this earth. Perhaps it was true. Maybe she had been sent to walk their paths for a season, to plant in them the unshakable seed of worth, and now the one who had sent her had called her home. Laura felt the ache that would swell in their hearts when the truth reached them. The space where Fatima's gentle laughter should be. The mornings when no basket would appear. The nights when the cold would feel sharper without her shawl-wrapped figure among them. And yet, under the ache, there would be a strength, for she had not only fed their bodies, but had taught them to see each other as she had seen them. Her ministry had never been hers alone. She had left it in their keeping. The wind softened, as though the watcher's task had been spoken and sealed. Laura thought she could almost see her Fatima, walking away through a meadow she had never seen before, to serve in a place where hunger and cold no longer reached. Laura whispered into the morning air, "Go well, Fatima." Somewhere beyond sight, the watcher followed her, not as the silent guardian of the woods, but as the welcoming guide to her new home. The path back to the riverbank felt heavier than when she had left it. Each step pressed deeper into the damp earth, as though the ground itself knew the weight she carried. The friends in the woods were as she had left them, scattered in small groups along the shore, some speaking softly, others staring out at the water. They turned when they saw her, and the boy was the first to ask, "You weren't going to leave without saying goodbye, were you?" Laura shook her head, though her voice caught in her throat. I came back. Because there's something you need to hear. They gathered without question, forming the same loose circle as the night before. The woman in the patched shawl drew her wrap tighter, her eyes searching Laura's face as if to read the words before they came. Laura took a slow breath. Fatima will not be coming back. She's been called to a place where her work is no longer needed, because there is no hunger, no cold, no sorrow there. Silence spread like a shadow over the group. The boy's brow furrowed, but he didn't look away. The bearded man dropped his gaze to the ground, tracing a shape in the dirt with his boot. The man closed his eyes as though holding on to the sound of her name. She loved you, Laura said, her voice gentler now. Not for what you could give her, but for who you were. She saw you as her friends in the woods, not the forgotten, not the unwanted. And the way she cared for you, that's something you can carry for each other now. The woman's lips trembled and she gave a soft nod. She always said she wasn't the only one who could bring kindness here. That's right, Laura replied. Her baskets, her listening, her presence, those weren't just gifts. They were lessons. You can keep them alive. She's gone where the Watcher needed her, but she left the work in your hands. The river gave a faint, silvery ripple, though no wind touched its surface. A few of them noticed, their eyes widening just enough to tell Laura they understood. The boy spoke last, his voice quiet but sure. Then we won't let the woods forget her. Laura felt the Watcher's presence above them, warm and approving as if sealing the promise. And though the ache remained in their hearts, it now held a thread of strength, pulled tight between them. When she finally turned to leave, they watched her go not as strangers passing on a road, but as keepers of a legacy they would guard together. The circle by the river remained unbroken for a long while after Laura's words. Faces were drawn, yet their eyes seemed to search the air, as though hoping Fatima herself might step from the pines one last time. And then, as if carried on the stillness, her voice came, not loud, not earthly, but so clear in the heart that no one doubted it. Our words are a revelation of who we are. The boy's head tilted, his breath catching. The woman in the patched shawl clutched the edge of her wrap. Even the bearded man, who had always hidden his feelings behind a tired half-smile, closed his eyes and bowed his head. It was a message that felt both tender and sharp. Fatima had known the weight words could carry, how they could wound or heal, build walls or open doors. She had chosen hers with care, planting them in soil that could grow something good. They remembered now how she had spoken to them, never with pity, never with disdain. Her words had been steady ropes thrown across the chasm between them and the rest of the world. Words that say you belong, you are seen, you are more than your troubles. Laura felt the truth settle in her chest like a stone that would never be dislodged. This was the ministry Fatima had carried. Not baskets or blankets alone, but the way she shaped her speech to reflect the love that dwelled in her. As the sound of the river pressed gently into the morning air, the group seemed to stand a little straighter. They had been given something to keep, something to live by. To guard their words, to let them be seeds rather than stones, to make them a true reflection of what they wished to be. The Watcher lingered above, its unseen gaze resting on each of them in turn, as though memorizing the moment. And then, like a shadow lifting, the air seemed lighter, filled with a quiet resolve. Laura looked into the faces of Fatima's friends in the woods and said, "Then let us speak in a way that would make her proud." And they knew in that moment that they would. When it came time for Laura to leave, there were no long farewells, only quiet nods and the kind of looks that said more than any speech could. The river glinted in the sunlight, its silver ripples now calm, as if it too had been part of the listening. The boy pressed a small stone into her hand. "Carry it," he said, "so you don't forget us." "I won't," Laura promised, and the words felt like a covenant. She stepped back onto the narrow path, the sound of the pines rising to meet her. Their branches swayed in a rhythm she recognized now, the cadence of Fatima's voice still woven into the air. The Watcher followed at a distance, silent yet deeply present, its gaze steady on the road ahead. Laura thought of Fatima's final message. Our words are a revelation of who we are. It stayed with her, warm and weighty, pressing her to examine her speech, the sharp edges she sometimes left unsoftened, the silences she let speak in place of kindness. Her feet carried her over roots and stones, yet her mind was on the friends she had left by the river. She imagined them speaking to one another with more gentleness, carrying forward the ministry that had once been Fatima's alone. As the morning wore on, the road widened, and in the distance she saw the faint outline of a figure sitting at a crossroads. A woman hunched over, clutching something in her lap. Laura's pace slowed. The woman's clothing was worn thin, and her shoulders shook as if she were caught between cold and sorrow. It struck Laura then. This was her moment. The lesson was no longer to be admired from a distance. It was to be lived. She felt the stone in her pocket, the watcher's gaze upon her, and Fatima's voice in the wind. I know you have yet to feel the tender weight of that watchful gaze. But when it finds you, do not fear. It is not a force of judgment, but a gentle call to awaken your inner light. Let its presence remind you that every truth, once shared, becomes a guide, lifting the shadows and connecting us all in a journey of hope. Embrace it, and you will discover that even the smallest witness can reveal the vast beauty of our shared destiny.